Right, PLCs part 1. The first thing I want to do is to dispel any myths that you might have that computers and PLCs are somehow new things. PLCs and computers have been around forever. To give you an example, we're just going to do a quick history lesson. In 1642, Blaise Pascal, the bloke who the pressure was named after, invented the Pascaline. The Pascaline was the very first pocket calculator. It could do addition, subtraction, multiplication and division to 4 decimal places, and it could do it pretty quickly. So that was the first type of calculator, and it was 1642. A little while later, 1832, Sir Charles Babbage, built what was called the difference engine. The difference engine was a computer, and it was built to calculate the tides. He built this difference engine, and it could do all this computing. Unfortunately, he didn't know how to program it. Luckily for him, he was at a dinner party one day, and he bumped into Ada, Countess of Lovelace. I think she was in some films, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Ada, Countess of Lovelace. And she was the foremost mathematical genius of her time. So he bumped into her, and she came round, and she showed him how to program his computer. So that's the first computer. As you can see, it used gears and levers and pulleys, and that's the very first computer programmer. 1854. An Irishman is having an argument in a pub. I know, it sounds unlikely. And he turns around to this other fella and he says, "Begorra, your argument doesn't make sense," except probably in an Irish accent. And he said, "No, what you're saying isn't logical." He went home from the pub and he sketched up a quick pamphlet, which he called Logic. And that pamphlet, this Irishman was called George Boole, and the mathematics which he invented was called Boolean mathematics. He invented the entire science of logic. 1890s. The Americans are having a big problem with their census. They have to do a census so that they can calculate the tax. Now, the problem they have is that the population of the US is growing. The 1880 census took 7 years to count, and by that reasoning they figured that the 1890 census would take 13 years to count. Now that's a big problem if you have to do it every 10 years. Luckily, a man called Hollerith came along, and he invented a machine that was able to count things very quickly, the Hollerith tabulating machine. And the idea was that everybody was given a little piece of card which was punched, and you would punch holes in this card to say things like your age and how many children you had and that sort of thing. And then the machine would count the punched cards. So Hollerith invented this. The 1890 census, instead of taking 13 years, they had the whole thing counted in 18 months. And the reason it took 18 months is because they did it twice. Hollerith then went off and founded a company which made tabulating machines and computers. And that wasn't that long ago. My dad, when he was a lad, worked on Hollerith tabulating machines. A little while later, the Hollerith company was changed its name to IBM. Now, Second World War. During the Second World War, the Germans had a code system which was called Enigma, which was unbreakable in theory. And using the Enigma code system, they managed to organize the submarines to, well, sink all the convoys. The British Navy obviously weren't too keen on that, but they had a secret weapon. They had a computer which was called Colossus. And Colossus was this massive computer using relays and diodes and valves, and it sat at a place called Bletchley Park. It was a super secret. And by using the computer, which they built, they managed to break the Enigma code. And by breaking the Enigma code, they found out where the submarines were, and that meant the convoys could avoid them and the warships could go get them. So the war was won by the good guys. In America, they also had a need for computers. Two reasons. Firstly, they needed computers to improve their gunnery. So they needed better gunnery computers. Two ships trying to hit each other at sea is very unlikely, especially when they're battleships, because battleships travel very, very fast, 30, 32 knots. So you have two ships traveling about 30 knots at high sea, and they're a long way away from each other, 40 kilometers away. And they're trying to shoot each other, so the chance of actually hitting the other ship is fairly slim. They needed computers to work out all the factors involved. They also needed computers to work out why it was so very hard to land aeroplanes on the decks of aircraft carriers. So the American Navy commissioned a computer, and it was called Project Whirlwind. There's a picture of the Project Whirlwind computer. Just before the Project Whirlwind computer was to be delivered, and you've got to imagine this is the 1940s, two very shady-looking characters, probably in greatcoats and wearing trilbies, stepped out of the shadows, stopped the truck, and said, "Well, Mac, you're not going to the Navy Yard. We need you to go down to New Mexico, because we've got an even bigger, higher priority project that needs a computer." And that high priority project was called the Manhattan Project. So the Project Whirlwind computer was sent to the Manhattan Project and helped to create the first bomb. Because all of these computers, the Colossus computer and Project Whirlwind computer, because they were all secret, nobody knew that they were there, which is why we didn't know just how long we've been using computers. The military have been using computers for a very long time now. That leads us up to about 1964. Around about 1964, I think it was the Ford Motor Company, they were having problems with their production line. Whenever they needed to do a radical change in their production line, for instance, put 2 headlights instead of 4 on the front of a car, they had to have a 3-month shutdown. It was easy enough to rejig the production line. The problem was rejigging all of the relay logic that used to turn things on. The relays that used to say, oh yeah, when this arrives, turn that on. When that arrives, turn that off. When this comes along, make that go upwards. So all the relay logic that would coordinate everything took ages to rejig. One of the reasons it took ages to rejig is because they never took the time to note down what modifications they'd made from last time. So the Ford Motor Company said, we want something which is a logical control system, that's what they used to call relays, but a logical control system, but that is programmable. We want a programmable logical controller, where there aren't real relays, there are pretend relays, software relays. So they put out the tender. The tender was won by the Modicon Company. And the Modicon Company built the Modicon 84, which was the first PLC. These are some pages out of the Modicon service manual, which I found in my stuff when I was cleaning out my stuff to move to Australia, which worries me that I was, working on it really. But anyway, so that's the old Modicon 84. Whenever you had a Modicon 84 delivered, you got this girl with it. She's probably 107 years old now. Here they're showing the Modicon 84 magically being levitated next to her. In actual fact, It took a forklift truck to lift the thing. It was a massive chunk of metal and power supply. So that's a brief history of computers up until the present day. Computers are not a recent thing. They've been around for an awful long time. The principles behind a computer were laid down by Babbage and Ada Lovelace a very long time ago. Now,